7 signs that God might be testing your faith. Are you passing or failing? My blessings come from the grace of God. Everything I have, every victory, and every moment of joy flows from His unending love. Please follow me so I can share them with you and inspire you to experience the same abundance in your life. Drop in men. If you have God in your heart and believe in His powerful grace that transforms, restores, and uplifts us daily, have you ever felt like everything in your life was falling apart, and no matter how hard you prayed, God seemed silent? You try to do the right thing, but obstacles keep piling up. You seek answers, but all you get is confusion. You ask God to open doors, and instead, they slam shut right in your face. If you've ever experienced this, let me tell you something. You are not alone. Some of the strongest believers in history have walked this exact path. Abraham, Joseph, Job, David, even Jesus himself. The question is not whether God tests His people. The question is, how will you respond when He does? God never tests us to break us. He tests us to build us, to refine us, to strengthen our faith so that when the storms of life come, we don't collapse under pressure. These tests aren't punishments. They're preparations. They're shaping you into the person God has called you to be. But how do you know if what you're going through is actually a test from God? How do you discern whether the trials in your life are meant to grow you or if they're simply random hardships? That's exactly what we're about to uncover. In this video, I'm going to walk you through 7 signs that God might be testing your faith. Some of these signs might surprise you. Some might hit close to home. But one thing is for sure, by the end of this, you will see your struggles in a completely different light. Stay with me until the end because the last sign is one of the most difficult tests of faith that a believer can ever face. But if you can recognize it and push through it, you will come out on the other side stronger, bolder, and unshakable in your faith. Are you ready? Let's get into it. Sign 1. When everything seems to go wrong. Let's be honest. When life starts falling apart, it's hard not to ask, God, why is this happening? You're doing your best, trying to live right, praying, trusting, and then suddenly, everything seems to collapse around you. Doors that once seemed open slam shut. People you counted on disappear. Opportunities you were excited about crumble. You start wondering if God is even listening. But what if I told you that this could be a test? Let's look at Job. Here was a man who loved God, a man who was righteous, faithful, and obedient. But in one day, one single day, he lost everything. His wealth, his home, his children, his health. Everything that made life comfortable was stripped away. And what did Job do? Did he curse God? Did he walk away from his faith? No. He grieved? Yes. He questioned? Absolutely. But he refused to turn his back on God. And because he held on, because he refused to let his circumstances define his faith, God restored everything double. Now, I'm not saying that every hardship in life is a test from God, but when everything starts going wrong despite your best efforts, pay attention. God could be testing you to see if you'll trust Him even when you don't understand. And trust me, this is where most people fail. They get frustrated. They walk away. They decide God isn't listening, so they stop praying. They stop believing. They stop fighting for their faith. But here's the truth. If you give up in the middle of the test, you will never see the breakthrough God had waiting for you at the end. So if you're in a season where nothing seems to be going right, ask yourself, is this a test? Is God seeing if I will trust Him no matter what? Because if you hold on, just like Job, your story won't end in loss. It will end in restoration. Sign 2. When you feel like your prayers are unanswered, you pray and pray and pray, and nothing happens. No sign, no breakthrough, no change. Just silence. And that silence, it can be deafening. You start questioning everything. Did I do something wrong? Is God ignoring me? Does He even care? But listen to me. God's silence is not His absence. Sometimes His silence is a test. Think about Hannah. She prayed for years, begging God for a child. She cried out to Him in desperation. But year after year, There was no answer. Nothing changed. Until the right time. Abraham waited 25 years for the promise of a son. Joseph waited 13 years in slavery and prison before he stepped into his destiny. Even Jesus, in the Garden of Gethsemane, prayed so intensely that he sweat drops of blood. And yet God didn't remove the suffering from him. Why? Because sometimes God's greatest work happens in the waiting. When your prayers seem unanswered, when it feels like God is silent, that's when your faith is being tested the most. Will you still trust Him when you can't see Him working? Will you still believe in His goodness, even when everything in you wants to doubt? This is where you have to hold on. Because here's the truth. Delayed does not mean denied. Just because God hasn't answered yet doesn't mean He won't. He is working behind the scenes in ways you cannot see. And if you remain faithful, if you keep believing even when it's hard, when the time is right, your breakthrough will come. So if you're in a season where your prayers feel like they're hitting a wall, don't give up. You might be in the middle of your test. Keep praying, keep believing, and keep trusting, because God always answers, even if it's not in the way or timing we expect. Sign 3. When you face unfair treatment, have you ever been treated unfairly for no reason? Maybe someone lied about you, betrayed you, or mistreated you even though you did nothing wrong. You worked hard, but someone else got the promotion. You were kind, but people took advantage of you. You trusted someone, and they turned their back on you. It's frustrating. It's painful. And if you're not careful, it can shake your faith. But here's the truth. Unfair treatment is often a test. Let's talk about Joseph. He had a dream from God. He had a destiny on his life. But what happened? His own brothers betrayed him. They threw him into a pit, sold him into slavery, and left him for dead. And as if that wasn't enough, after working hard and staying faithful, he was falsely accused and thrown into prison. If anyone had the right to be bitter, to question God, to walk away from faith, it was Joseph. But he didn't. Joseph stayed faithful, even when everything was unfair. Even when his life kept going from bad to worse, he never lost sight of God. And because of that, he went from the prison to the palace. The very people who betrayed him had to come back to him for help. Here's the lesson. Unfair treatment is often a setup for something greater. When people mistreat you, don't let it break your faith. Let it refine your faith. When people lie about you, don't waste energy seeking revenge. Let God fight for you. When life isn't fair, don't quit, because God is setting you up for something bigger than you can imagine. This test is about your response. Will you let bitterness consume you, or will you trust that God is in control? Because when you pass this test, your story will turn just like Joseph's. What was meant to harm you will be used for your good. Sign 4. When you are called to step out of your comfort zone, if you're feeling like God is pushing you into something new, something bigger, something uncertain, it might be a test. Because here's the thing. Faith doesn't grow in comfort. Think about Peter. One night, he saw Jesus walking on the water, and Jesus told him to come. Now, let's be real. Walking on water defies all logic. It's impossible. But faith isn't about logic, it's about trust. And in that moment, Peter had a choice. He could stay in the boat, where it was safe, predictable, and comfortable. Or he could step out into the unknown, the unpredictable, the impossible. And he chose faith. He stepped out, and for a moment, he did the impossible. He walked on water. He defied the storm. But the second he took his eyes off Jesus and focused on the wind and the waves, he started to sink. That's exactly what happens to us. God calls us into something greater. He tells us to start that business, step into ministry, go after that dream, take that risk. And in the beginning, we're excited. We step out in faith. But then the storm hits. The doubts come. The voices in our head start saying, what if I fail? What if this doesn't work? What if I'm not good enough? And before we know it, we start sinking. But here's the lesson. Faith means trusting God even when the storm is raging. Faith means stepping out of the boat even when it doesn't make sense. Faith means walking toward Jesus even when fear tells you to turn back. So if you feel like God is calling you into something uncomfortable, if He's leading you into a season of uncertainty, this is your test. Will you step out or will you stay in the boat? Because the greatest miracles happen outside of your comfort zone. Sign 5. When temptations and doubts increase, have you ever noticed that the moment you decide to get serious about your faith, temptation suddenly comes at you from every direction? The moment you commit to praying more, reading your Bible, or living righteously, you start struggling with thoughts, desires, and distractions that weren't even an issue before. That's not a coincidence. That's a test. Let me remind you of what happened to Jesus. Right after he was baptized, right after the heavens opened and God declared, "This is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased." What happened next? The Spirit led him into the wilderness to be tempted by the devil. Think about that. Jesus himself was tested, and not just with small temptations, but with things that directly challenge his identity, his purpose, and his faith. In God's timing, the devil tempted him with physical desires, turning stones into bread when he was hungry. He tempted him with pride, proving his power by throwing himself off the temple. He tempted him with shortcuts, offering him kingdoms without the cross. And every single time, Jesus responded with the Word of God. He stood firm, and after the test, angels came to minister to him. Now listen, if Jesus was tested, what makes you think you won't be? The closer you get to your breakthrough, the more intense the attacks will be. The enemy doesn't waste time on people who aren't a threat. If you're feeling overwhelmed with temptation, if you're battling doubt, if you're struggling with thoughts that make you question your faith, this might be a test. This is the moment when you need to stand strong, not in your own strength, but in the strength of God. Just like Jesus, use the Word of God as your weapon. Declare it over your life. Speak it against the lies. Resist the temptation. Because on the other side of this test is something greater than you can imagine. If you're under attack, it's because the enemy sees what's coming. Don't give in. Pass the test. Sign 6. When you lose something or someone important, one of the hardest tests of faith is loss. Losing a loved one, losing a relationship, losing a job, a home, a dream. And when that loss happens, it shakes you. It makes you question everything. You start asking, God, why? You don't understand why He allowed it. You don't understand why your prayers weren't answered the way you wanted. You don't understand why the thing or the person you loved so much was taken away. Let me take you back to Job. This man lost everything. His children, his wealth, his health, his reputation. His wife told him to curse God and die. His friends accused him of hidden sin. But in the middle of his suffering, in the middle of his unanswered questions, Job made one of the most powerful declarations of faith in the Bible. Though he slay me, yet will I trust him. Job 13 verse 15. That kind of faith, faith that holds on even in the face of loss, is rare. God is not cruel. He is not unjust. But He does allow loss to test and strengthen our faith. Because faith that only exists in good times isn't faith at all. Look at Abraham. He waited 25 years for the son God promised him. Then one day, God told him to sacrifice Isaac. That made no sense. Isaac was the promise. Isaac was the future. But Abraham didn't hesitate because his faith wasn't in Isaac. His faith was in God. And at the last moment, God provided a ram. The test was never about losing Isaac. It was about proving Abraham's trust in God. Could it be that your loss is a test? Could it be that God is asking, do you trust me even when you don't understand? Do you trust me even when it hurts? Because listen to me, God never takes without giving back more. If you remain faithful, if you hold on even when you don't see the purpose, God will restore you. Maybe not in a way you expect, but in a way that will be even greater than what you lost. If you're walking through loss right now, I want you to hear this. God sees you. He is with you, and He will not waste your pain. Hold on. This is not the end of your story. Sign 7. When God asks you to surrender something, there comes a moment in every believer's life when God asks them to lay something down. And this, my friend, is one of the most difficult tests of faith you'll ever face. Maybe it's a relationship. Maybe it's a dream. Maybe it's a career path, a habit, or even your personal plans for the future. Whatever it is, it's something you don't want to let go of. But then God whispers, "Will you trust me enough to give this up?" This is what happened to Abraham. God had finally given him his promised son, Isaac. But one day, God tested him and said, "Take your son, your only son, whom you love, and sacrifice him as a burnt offering." Can you imagine the weight of that? The very thing Abraham had prayed and waited for. God was now asking him to surrender. But Abraham obeyed. He took Isaac up the mountain. He built the altar. He tied his son down. And just as he was about to bring the knife down, God stopped him. Why? Because the test wasn't about Isaac. It was about Abraham's heart. It was about whether Abraham trusted God more than. He loved the promise. And because Abraham passed the test, God blessed him beyond anything he could have imagined. Sometimes, God asks us to surrender things not because He wants to take them away, but because He wants to see if we love them more than we love Him. This is where so many people struggle. They hold on to something so tightly that they refuse to let God take control. But the problem is, you can't receive what God has for you if your hands are full of what He's asking you to release. If you feel like God is asking you to surrender something, don't fight it. It might hurt. It might not make sense. But if you obey, you will discover that what God gives you in return is always greater than what you gave up. Because at the end of the day, faith is not just about believing in God. It's about trusting Him with everything. Conclusion: embracing the test of faith. So now, let's ask the question again. Is God testing you? Are you facing a season where everything seems to be going wrong? Are you crying out in prayer and hearing nothing but silence? Are you dealing with unfair treatment, unexpected loss, overwhelming temptation, or a call to step into something terrifyingly uncertain? If you are, don't panic. Don't lose heart. Don't give up. Because here's the truth. Every great person of faith has been tested. Abraham, Joseph, Job, Moses, David, Peter, Paul, even Jesus. And every single time, the test wasn't meant to break them. It was meant to prepare them, to take them to the next level, to equip them for the calling God had placed on their lives. And the same is true for you. Your test is not the end. It is the beginning. If you hold on, if you remain faithful, if you trust God even when it doesn't make sense, you will pass this test. And on the other side, you will step into a level of blessing, purpose, and strength that you never imagined possible. So today, make a choice. Choose faith over fear. Choose trust over doubt. Choose God over everything else, because He is faithful. And if you don't quit, your test will become your testimony.